Today, my guest is Dr. Christine Izuakor. We talk about staying grounded, how to be intentional with self-care, and how self-awareness can help you evolve. Hello, Christine.
Hi, it's nice to see you.
You too. Thanks for being here today.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I am so excited about our conversation. And I'm so excited. I always love starting with an introduction of my guest and then sharing with the audience how we met. So today, our guest is Dr. Christine Izuakor. I think I got that down. Okay. And she is the CEO of Cyber Pop-Up, which is an on-demand cybersecurity service platform that helps businesses prevent, detect, and respond to cyber attacks, which is an increasing need as we are growing with all the data and tools we have available. But before she started her business, she spent over a decade leading cybersecurity functions within Fortune 100 arenas. And one of the coolest facts I think about you is that you have a Ph.D. in security engineering and that you are the youngest African American woman ever to do so, which I just think is so awesome. And you launched your business last year, which I think is also fantastic. And one of the other things that I wanted people to also know about you is, in addition to, being a business owner, have had this great career prior to being a business owner, is that you're also an influencer. And you really help to, inspire those that are in underrepresented groups. And I think that's something really, really special about what you do. And the last thing I'll say before we jump into our conversation is how we met. So we met at 1871 in Chicago, back in probably the winter months of this year. And I was leading a branding workshop there, and you were attending it, and as you were working on your business, and then we were able to reconnect after that, and that's what led us to today.
Yes, and I'm so thankful for that day. I'm so glad we got to meet.
Me too. And one of the things I think I'm really excited about today as we talk about wellness and self-care practices is, especially as I've been interviewing a lot of women like yourself who are, highly successful, very driven, are out there working hard every day, as an entrepreneur, but also know the grind of really corporate America and, are balancing both that entrepreneurial work, the part of you that's also this brand, this personal brand that you're putting out there, and some ways that you're doing that for yourself. And, I really love being able to kind of host this and pull out sort of all these sort of different things about each guest.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation, and thanks so much for the amazing introduction.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, before we get into talking about the self-care piece, I would love to know a little bit more about how did you get into cybersecurity? I mean, that's something that I think is a newer industry in a lot of ways, and it is rare. I mean, even think as females, you don't hear about a lot of women in this profession. So tell me how you got into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually trying to be a medical doctor, quite honestly. Had no idea I would get into tech at all, let alone cybersecurity. To your point, there's it's a fairly new industry still compared to a lot of the other ones. There's not a lot of women in the industry. There's not a lot of people of color. And so the furthest thing from my mind earlier in life. But I failed miserably at trying to become a doctor, which in hindsight I truly appreciate because it led me to what I absolutely love. But during that kind of process of failing and just, opening my eyes to the fact that I wanted to succeed. I wanted to do something that really connected me to my purpose and my passion. And so I started exploring anything and everything and started taking different electives in school, from finance to marketing to everything under the sun. And I took a cybersecurity class where we were tasked with basically cracking an encryption code. And I stayed up all night trying to figure this thing out. And when I finally cracked it, the adrenaline rush that I felt and just how fun it was for me to get to that point let me know that it felt more like fun and more like a game than, work. And to think that I could actually be paid to do something like that and build a career out of it was just insane to me. And so yeah, at that point, I, changed my major and never looked back.
That's amazing. I also love that you're so open and vulnerable about talking about, the kind of the shift and the pivot that you went through early on. And that sometimes even if there's sort of one vision we have for ourselves with a career or profession, it may or may not be the right fit once we get into it, and that you can completely use that experience to unfold something new in your life. And
yeah,
it really seems like this is, your path. I would love to know more about now with what your company is doing, because I saw recently that you're helping to educate, people who are wanting to get into this career field.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that Cyber Pop-Up really brings like all of my passions together into one place, which is truly exciting. It's like on one end, I know that businesses, really need cybersecurity expertise right now, and there's this huge shortage of not just talent, but shortage of just diversity and having those different perspectives that can, contribute a lot of value to the industry. And so yeah, it's like the one side of the business really helps connect companies to cybersecurity services. But then on the other end, and again, that I'm extremely passionate about, is helping people from all different walks of life and from different backgrounds get that exposure to cybersecurity so that they can join this movement and become experts in this space and continue to contribute to the companies who so desperately need the help right now.
I think that's really amazing. And I think, when I think about running a business like that, growing it, growing your client set, growing the, basically the freelance employee group that you have, and helping also to support the industry, I'm sure that that's exciting, but at the same time, it keeps you probably very full from your schedule. And I would love to know, as you think about that and you think about sort of self-care and that balance, that mental health balance, what does self-care mean to you right now?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of different things. To your point, leading a startup and just being an entrepreneur is already it's a lot, right? And then for me, just knowing that there's the company, there's I do a lot of philanthropic things. I try to balance having fun and like I pride myself in being a very multifaceted person, right? And so when you're juggling so many different things, self-care can get lost very quickly if you don't pay attention to it. And so I think for me, I look at it at two angles. One is there's the common things that I feel like a lot of people tend to think about when you talk about self-care. So the physical aspect of self-care around exercising and spa days and facials and all of that fun stuff that I like to do. There's the kind of mental component of it, right? And just really protecting my peace, like my mental state, right? And not compromising that, taking mental breaks. And then kind of the third component that I think a lot of people think about is the spiritual side of things, right? And if that's important to people. And so for me, it's praying, journaling, being really in tune with my religion. But I think over time, my view of self-care has also evolved quite a bit. So in the end, for me, it's in order to stay grounded, like mental peace is so important to me, and like the mental energy that I carry is important. But I think the views and how I achieve that have shifted quite a bit over time. So I think, if I look at myself maybe even 10 years ago, or when I was, really, coming out of high school and getting into college and really kind of growing and evolving, I used distractions a lot to keep my mental peace. And what I mean by that is like I would overwork. Like I was the student who I would be enrolled in like 8 classes at a time, and also like have an internship and like do all of these things to distract myself from really just being with myself or dealing with any like mental struggles that I was having. I would drink, eat, go to social engagements, a lot of things that people do to navigate some of that. And so it was essentially hiding or like running from myself in order to feel at peace. And it sounds so weird to say, and it might not make sense, but in hindsight, like I know that's what I was doing. And I think as I grew, like I learned something very important, and that's that self-care to me is all about self-awareness and all about like being okay with with being myself and being okay with like being with myself. So yeah, I believe that like knowing my true self is like the true like essence of self-care. And to me, that's like understanding like who I am, like what got me here, what's weighing me down, like what do I need to heal from in order to flourish. And I think that's where, the self-care truly comes into play. I think there's also different levels in a sense that there's self-care like from a maintenance standpoint. So again, like the things that I mentioned, like you can get massages, you can meditate a lot. But then there's also self-care in a sense of like healing, I think, in like constant evolution and growth. So for me, like when I really like took a step back to stop and think about some of the things that I've experienced throughout life, some of like the really good things and some of the pretty traumatic things, right? And figuring out how I can continue to be mindful of those things and reflect on them and grow from them. And so, for example, like one of the things that I did from a self-care standpoint on the healing side is I would set either my like phone background, or I'd keep like a baby picture of myself somewhere in sight where I can see it often, just to kind of reassure little Christine that no matter what happens, like look at me now, like you're okay, like she survived, she's okay. But I know that like she's still in here, right? And self-care to me is really taking care of little Christine that's still in here and being nice to her, and knowing that I'm going to do everything in my power to protect her. I think that that is like the true essence of just like really like being so in tune with who I am. Like that to me is self-care.
I love that answer, first of all. Thank you for sharing so much, because really having that kind of context is one of the things that I love about these conversations, is helping to give people new ideas and inspiration. And one of the things I love, well, there's a number of things, but so one I love that you talked and acknowledged is about sort of all the different pieces of ourselves with self-care, right? There's the physical part of getting some activity and mobility in the body. There's the mental piece of kind of the grounding. And then there's the spiritual side, no matter what that means for people. And that one way I'm hearing you've had success is by really trying to give yourself access to self-care in all three of those ways. And then I also love how you talked about both the maintenance and the balance, because I agree with you completely that the kind of that maintenance category of some of those, treats for ourselves, like having a spa time, or even like I don't take a bubble bath every night, or with salts or crystals or whatever. But when I do that, it feels really reviving, and it's part of a maintenance because I try to do it a couple times a month. But that the healing part is really kind of that deeper level. And your example of having your picture of baby Christine, I think is amazing. I'm curious, when did you come up with that idea, and how long have you been sort of carrying that sort of self-care with you to remind you to take care of that little girl, that essence of who you are? How long have you been doing that, or how'd you come up with that?
Yeah. So I definitely can't take credit. I had an amazing life coach who just taught me so many different things. But I would say I started doing that around 2017. So about 3 years ago. And that all stemmed from, I think I got to a point in life where I had seen at a young age like a lot of just success beyond what I had even dreamed for myself. This was around the time when I had graduated with my Ph.D. Like I had broken a record. I had so many people coming to me and saying, "Hey, I'm so inspired by what you're doing," and like it was just a great feeling of knowing that I was contributing and giving back. But for whatever reason, I still deep down inside like didn't feel fulfilled or happy, or like something was missing, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And I happened to get in contact with this organization that does a lot of transformative work. And I went through one of their programs. I got paired up with a life coach who really helped me dig down into, again, what made me who I am, and how are the experiences and the things, the systems that I developed as a kid into adulthood, and all of these things, like how are they impacting who I am today? What's working well and serving me well, and what isn't? And I can, appreciate the things that may not be. At one point they helped me, right? And so I can appreciate them, but I also have to make some conscious decisions on how to, continue to evolve. And so through that entire process, one of the things that I realized is that I was very hard on myself. Like, there was so much negative self-talk, and so much pressure that I was putting on myself to, be everything and do everything. And I think that kind of idea came as a suggestion from my life coach to really take a step back and remember that, again, like, that little girl is still in here, and you should be kind to yourself, right? And care about yourself first. Like, that's the essence, again, of self-care, is really loving yourself and seeing yourself.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. That's really interesting. And I also appreciate, you talking about how you've had some support along the way too, right? Because there's lots of different forms of that, whether it is someone that's some level of a coach or a therapist, or, even other people in your community that you trust, but to bring in that perspective and to try it out. And I'm inspired by that actually quite a bit. I was just thinking about, I would like to do that for me. Because you're right, it is about, self-care is that self-love, and it starts with really knowing who you are and making time for that and sitting with some of the discomfort sometimes. But I like the idea that a lot of times when we think about, looking at a picture of a baby or a smaller version of us, I don't know, you're like, oh, okay, I was kind of a cute child, or, you see this like light in your own eyes that, you see differently as you age and you look back at that picture. And so that's a really beautiful way to kind of reconnect at that very deep level. And kind of keeping going on that kind of deeper level, as we think about, your why, obviously you have a lot of different things you're passionate about and you're pursuing right now, but, how do you use self-care to support your why? I'd actually be curious what your why is, but then also, how you're using self-care to support it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my purpose in life is to reach my full potential, whatever that may be. And I think the other part, though, is to share that journey and share the story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, with hopes that will inspire others to reach their full potential, whatever that might be. And so I think at a very high level, like, whether it's cybersecurity or any other topic, it's reaching my full potential, sharing the story, helping others kind of learn and grow in the process as well. And so when I think about some of the tactical goals that I have around, being the best cybersecurity leader that I can be, right? Being a huge diversity advocate, being a philanthropist and helping people in so many different ways there, investing, all of that, like, it's juggling a lot, right? And so I feel like in order to reach my full potential in all of these different spaces, right, I have to be grounded. Like, if you're juggling so much as a juggler, right, like, you, it's a lot harder to maintain that if you're like have a shaky foundation. And so I think being grounded is important. And then, like, in order to be grounded, it's like I have to be self-aware, right? Everything to me comes back to that self-awareness. And in order to be self-aware, I have to be willing to dig into certain things in order to evolve. And so I use self-care to support my kind of why by being super mindful and by committing to continually evolving. And so a couple of like specific examples that come to mind when I think about some of the things that I've done towards my purpose and how self-care has tied into that. This was a huge aha moment for me in my career. So I grew up in a very, my parents came here from Nigeria. And so I grew up in a very Nigerian culture heavy household. And one of the things that I feel like our culture is very known for is just like being super driven, and like it's like you have to succeed or there's no other option. And so I grew up in that kind of household of like, education comes first and you have to make the best grades and do all of that. And it was great. I mean, it helped me grow a lot, but at the same time, it's a lot of pressure. And I think one of the things that I didn't realize is this sounds so bad, but like in our house, like the way that our people push us to to do better or to be great is through like slight insults, quite honestly, or through shaming you into like wanting to be better, right? And so that's difficult to navigate. But one of the things that I realized was an aha moment for me is that because that's how I was raised and brought up, as I started to lead my own team early in my career, I started to develop them the same way that I was developed. And as I'm sure you can imagine, like trying to develop a team through shame and insults does not work very well, right? And so it took that reflection and that realization that like, hey, this served me well growing up. This is how I was raised, and it's fine. But I had to take a step back and do that reflecting and that meditating and realize that it wasn't the best for my team. And that completely shifted and flipped my leadership style once I had that aha moment. And I think it helped me care for my team better, but then also from a self-care standpoint for me, it again helped me appreciate how I was raised, but then realize that I needed to make that shift. And it made leadership so much easier for me. And so sometimes like another thing I took out of that is like sometimes you don't realize that changes that you make in relationship to other people also impact your own self-care and making your life easier to a certain extent. And so that's one that comes up. I think another one in terms of we talk about health and the physical aspect of it. And I know that for the why that I have, right, in reaching my full potential, a part of that is being the best version of me that I can be, just from a health standpoint as well too, right? I want to be as healthy as I can be, and so on. And so I think in the past, after or before doing that kind of transformation period that I talked about, I was at a point where I was again trying to hide from myself and like run from my own mental stress. And so I would eat stress away. And I remember one time doing this kind of mindfulness exercise of like any time, and I did it for maybe like a week or so, and any time that before I ate, I would pause and just do like a quick mental check. I'm like, how am I feeling right now? Like, what's going on? And that was another kind of aha moment for me, because I would say probably 80% of the time, it wasn't that I was hungry. It was that something had angered me or like frustrated me just before that. And normally I would just like go through the motions and just eat something, versus this time like I really thought about it. I was like, like, okay, I need to sit with this emotion and just deal with it versus like trying to numb it, right? And so that's another kind of it's a small thing, but it makes such a huge difference, right? And it's something that has stuck with me for a while. And if you were talking to me, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, you would see a 50-pound heavier version of myself for that reason. And so I feel like that's another good example of how just like self-care, even from that aspect of just like your relationship with eating, right, has made such a huge difference for me. And then the last example that I would give is in terms of relationships. So of course relationships are a huge part of potential. Like you can have really strong relationships that help you grow and flourish and reach that full potential, and you can have some that detract and take you away from that. And so in the past, I also stayed in a pretty toxic relationship for quite a while, and in hindsight, like that took a toll on like where I feel like I could have been like in that time, just in terms of, again, that goal of reaching my full potential. And I feel like by staying there, like I wasn't caring for myself, right? I was, putting, I feel like, the needs of others before mine, and all kinds of things. But I think the biggest takeaway there for me is that, again, relationships have a huge impact on my purpose, right? And on my why. And so today, what I do from a self-care standpoint is I have to evaluate every relationship and every connection and every friendship, regardless of what level it is, to ensure that that person, one, aligns with my purpose, and that person cares about my self-care journey, right, just as much as I care about other people's, and that person cares about my mental peace. Like, all of those things are so important. And so I think just when it comes to self-care, like, it's also making sure that the people that I'm surrounding myself with are also just as invested in my self-care as I am in the people that I care about.
Thank you for all those examples. I mean, I think they're really powerful. And, kind of going back and reflecting on the first one that you shared, thinking about what, about the way you grew up and how that's impacted you as a leader, and then, both in leading a team, but then reflecting on your own emotions as a leader. I'd be curious with that first one, because I think a lot of people could relate to this, right? As we get older and we have more distance from the way we grew up, and we start to ask ourselves more questions, and especially as those of us who really want to grow and shift and, see those purposes be actualized, it is a common journey to kind of go back and sort of learn from who I am and who I've been as I want to go to where I'm becoming. And we're all influenced, by the way we grow up and the people that help raise us and support us. And I know I've seen a therapist for several years. And so one of the things that I know is that in going on a similar journey myself, you learn those people in your life, like you said, culturally, or the way they were raised and the way we're nurtured. A lot of times it comes from the best of intentions, or an intention. Right. It's just that we're all different people. So we take in those cues differently depending on who we are. So I'd be curious for you, how did you start to kind of dissect that for yourself? Like, at what point did you sort of, kind of realize, when you're talking about that example with your team, how did you get there? Like, what was the kind of insight that got you to that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, and this is similar to the first example that I gave. I feel like I've been fortunate enough to have, whether it's coaches or, different programs or frameworks that have really helped me kind of question my own thoughts. And so in that instance, I was in a leadership program through my employer maybe like 2 years ago or so. And we had done like a complete like 360 assessment where we got a ton of very candid feedback from different people, from leaders that I'd worked with, to people who had reported to me, like in my team, to peers, and that feedback was so valuable. I can't emphasize that enough, and I think that how brutally honest people were is something that I appreciate, because it's like, on one end, like, there were some parts of the report that I'm reading and I'm happy and like, oh my gosh, like, I'm really making a difference. There's some parts where I wanted to cry, because I was like, oh my gosh, like, I had no idea that the way that I operated would impact people in this way, right? And it's like, until you get that feedback and get that insight, you just don't know. And so I think for me, that 360 feedback process is what kind of gave me some insight into some of the ways that I was being perceived. And then from there, I was able to take that and really start to break it down and kind of understand, okay, this is how this is making a good portion of people feel. This is how I'm thinking that it will make people feel, and where is that coming from, kind of. And I think that led me back to realizing that, hey, this is how I was raised, and it's worked for me, it's normal for me, but maybe it's not for other people.
Yeah, well, and I think you make a really great point with that in terms of the word you use that I kind of take away is framework. I know, one way we can think about learning things are from like the coaches and the community we're around. Another can be the processes and frameworks that can help us. And I was thinking, as you were just sharing that also when you were talking about the example of kind of pausing mindfully before you would eat for that week of time that you were trying to bring that awareness, it was sort of your own framework that you were putting into practice, or one that you had learned, to take that moment, to pause, to ask yourself a question, and then make a decision about, something as simple and fundamental as eating, which we do all day. I can really relate to that too. I think there's definitely times in my life when things are stressful that food can be very comforting and very soothing, and it's such a natural, part of who we are as humans. We need food to survive, but at the same time, it can be something that throws us out of balance physically, and then can kind of begat a cycle. But I kind of heard that, and then the third piece that you were talking about, which I think is also so important around relationships, and also in order to serve yourself and to be able to be caring for yourself the way you need, that, we're putting out energy for every relationship and every person that we are spending time with, whether that's professionally or personally. And depending on where you fall in that introvert extrovert spectrum, it can also be a huge output of energy, and you want to make sure that the people that you're sharing that with are sharing a similar, vibe or, path as you, or just in general are supportive of where we may not all see eye to eye, and that can be what makes relationships so incredibly interesting in life, is getting different perspectives or listening to someone share something you're like, well, I don't agree with that at all, but it doesn't mean that that's a bad relationship. But then sometimes unfortunately find ourselves in situations where that give and take, and I just call it kind of energy, is just not aligned. And I think it's fantastic that you had a learning and realized, what was most important to you. How do you think you came to sort of that aha or awakening? Was it something you felt? Was it a physical manifestation, like feeling tired or feeling frustrated? Or how did you kind of realize, you mentioned a toxic relationship, but then also sort of a re-examining of all relationships. Like how did you figure that piece out?
So I think on the relationship side, it's a little bit different from the others. I had been in that specific example, I'd been in that relationship for about 9 years. So it was a long time to be kind of in darkness. And I think at some point, unfortunately, I just broke. Like I don't know. I don't know if it was like just where I was in life, because I think around that same time when I kind of tied everything together from a relationship standpoint, I was also going through that kind of transformation period, right, where I was doing so much reflecting on, again, how I was raised, and like looking at, I think this ties in here well too. Like as I started looking at how I was raised and like my family system and dynamic, I realized that I had basically just recreated my parents' relationship, which also was kind of that same cycle of toxicity, unfortunately. I had recreated that exact same environment. And I think it wasn't until I really took the time to stop and reflect, especially after I had been hurt so badly towards the end of that relationship, to realize that all of that tied together, and that what I had experienced as a kid was significantly influencing my decisions as an adult. I think it was, again, like that entire year of just like, that was a really good year for me. It was really tough, but it was a really good year of just digging really deep into, all of the different events and things that made me who I am. And so, that shed a lot of light on how I was dealing with relationships and my love life, at least.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I know I kind of asked you a more intimately vulnerable question there, but I can relate to that too. And I was in a very, very long-term relationship from kind of right as being college all the way until a few years ago. And for me, it wasn't necessarily a toxic relationship, but there were parts of it that were not serving either of us at a certain point. And I can relate to the fact that when you start to transform and you start to grow and you start to ask questions of yourself, things can really shift and change. And you mentioned that it was a really good year for you. That's what I heard in that year, but I'm sure it was very hard. And I can relate in the ways of knowing and reflecting on my own journey that I've definitely had some very, very hard years of like the darkest, most gut-wrenching places. But the thing that has helped me is that I've been able to take care of myself. And in that journey and asking myself those questions, it's like nurtured me for me in a new way, which is like kept me optimistic and positive. And all the times that, it almost, I look back and think like, I don't even know in those months, like how I was still like running a business and showing up,
Right.
Yeah. Well, I would be curious too, thinking about where we are now, right? I know we've been kind of going there and talking about the good and the bad in life and all the different kind of perspectives that we bring. But, we're in a time right now living in, I kind of bring this up with everybody, we're in a global pandemic, something that we've never lived through really in our generation or our parents' generation. And we're also in a time, especially in, some of the bigger cities, where we're directly feeling some impact of, change that's needed in our country. And some of it is really exciting, and then some of the ways it's unraveling, especially in a city like Chicago, can be scary at moments, because there's a lot of emotion coming out, and when it kind of goes from peaceful to rioting, it can be scary. But taking all that in, to me, the term I use a lot is there's just a lot of uncertainty out there. And I'd be curious, as we're talking about self-care and we kind of put into today, right now, what's happening, how have your practices or routines shifted around self-care with everything going on in the world right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely been a shift, and I feel like self-care has never been, more important than it is right now. Just between the major shift in the way that we operate, right, to not being able to see friends and loved ones, and in some cases to a lot of the unrest, to feeling unsafe, to losing family members. Like, there's just so much going on, and it's so compressed into this last couple of months. And so yeah, I think that it's changed for me in a sense that I have to take the time to reflect and really dedicate to self-care more frequently, and I have to be much more intentional about it. I think that for me, especially just because of the shift that our company has made so quickly in the last couple of months, and because of the level of passion that I have for this, right, it's very easy for me to block everything out and work for like 18 hours straight for like 7 days. Especially since I don't have to leave and go anywhere. Like I live by myself. Like I most of my family is in Houston. I live in Chicago, right? And so I have friends in Chicago also, but because everybody's social distancing and everything, it's very easy for me to like close myself off in my apartment and just work, which is not good at all. And so I think for me, like, I have to be much more intentional about taking the breaks, taking the time, like listening to myself, especially. So I do a ton of meditating. Like, even if there's days when I have to, do a long stretch of work, I make sure that, I don't go like 3 or 4 hours. Like, if I'm doing a long stint like that, like, I don't go 3 or 4 hours without taking a step back. I'll meditate for a little bit. I'll take a walk. I'll do something, and then come back and keep going. And so yeah, I think that's been important. I feel like the other piece is, and this is a little bit funny to me, but I'm an introvert, and so to me, like, I like being I like being on my own. Like, I enjoy working in teams. Like, I love my team. I love working with people. I like being around friends and family, but I'm super energized and do some of my best work when I'm like by myself. And so that's shifted a little bit during this era, where I think too much of anything is not a good thing, right? And so I found myself at one point struggling a lot mentally with the idea of not being able to see my family and loved ones, and all of that. And that's where like self-care became very important too. And self-care became not just, hey, I'm gonna meditate, or I'm gonna take a bubble bath or do those things. It became, hey, I'm gonna make sure that I carve out this amount of time to FaceTime with my sisters and my brother, and to talk to my mom and dad, and to just be with like my family and the people that I care about. That became a huge part of self-care for me during this time. That before, like, I did those things, but I think being very intentional about it and truly like needing it became really huge during this time too. And so yeah, I would say like my routines or the things that I do haven't changed. But I think the frequency and the intentionality behind them have gotten much more stringent. Like I said earlier, and you mentioned this too, like, I'm a very framework heavy person. I'm a huge planner. I'm a huge scheduler. And so it's like literally like I have my schedule where I'm like, okay, I'm going to meditate here. I'm going to like FaceTime this person here. And I just like make sure that I schedule those things in to keep myself sane.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because that you use the word intentional a few times, and I think that's a great way to explain what can be a very successful method right now. And whether it's scheduling it in, or knowing every day I need to make this time for myself, so I'm going to figure out when that works. I think that's a great takeaway. One other thing I'd be curious about is, Is there anything, I know you mentioned using FaceTime, but are there any other sort of digital resources or tools or classes or workshops that you've started to explore that are different during this time?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, I like tried a bunch of different things just to see like what worked and what didn't. And so I've kind of gotten down to like what are my core processes. Like in the beginning, like I was trying all kinds of different Netflix and YouTube videos on everything from like home workouts to like home meditations. And oh my gosh, I can't tell you how I think this is something that like YouTube needs to work on. Like when you're going through like a meditation video and an ad pops up out of nowhere.
Oh, no.
And like it defeats the entire purpose.
Yes.
um, but yeah, I had that happen a couple of times, and so I was like, okay, like I like the meditation videos and that kind of help and support. Definitely would have to like pay to get the ad removed or something. But I feel like those options are very helpful. I think the ones that I kind of dwindled my list down to that I realized worked very well for me are scheduling the FaceTimes. I do my like facials and things like that. I use a meditation app. One of the things that like I liked and kind of got like really serious about is like in gamifying it and like doing like I track like the streaks of like how many days can I go like meditating, and I think my longest streak was probably like it was like 40 days, and I was so upset like that the way that I broke the streak is because I had planned to meditate and like I waited until like 12:15 a.m. And so it was going to be for the same day. Yeah, it was going to be for the same day, but like I missed it. And so like in my app, like it doesn't show. So like I had to start the streak over. But
Oh,
no. But yeah, those are the like little things that like push me to like make sure that even if like I feel like I've done it enough where like on my own, like if I haven't taken that mental break, I can feel it, and like I don't necessarily need the app to remind me anymore. But in the beginning stages, like that was a good way to kind of push me to keep it up consistently.
yeah, those are really great examples. I appreciate you sharing those. This has been amazing, Christine. It just has. I've had so much fun chatting with you. Thank you for sharing everything that you have, because I think you've given our audience so many different ideas and ways to think about self-care. And I really appreciate you sharing some more deep experiences from your own life, both personally and professionally. I mean, that's just what makes this kind of conversation so special. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. Like this, I love being able to have this conversation with you. Of course, like this is such an important topic, and to the point of my purpose being to kind of share my journey with hopes that helps other people reach their full potential. This is all a part of it. This is something that everybody has to kind of deal with and navigate. So definitely happy to share, and thank you again for having me.
You're welcome. See you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.